A Texas jury found former FLDS President Wendell Nielsen guilty this week. 3 counts of bigamy. Jurors deliberated for less than 2 hours. Nielsen, he himself performed marriage ceremonies, joining polygamous leader Warren Jeffs with underage girls. Nielsen himself, again, allegedly married to 37 child brides. He now faces 10 years in prison. Jeffs, obviously already there. He was convicted of raping minors. Joining me, Flora Jessup, raised in a polygamous family. She's the author of Church of Lies. Alyssa Wall, born into a polygamous cult that forced her into an illegal marriage at the age of 14. She is the author of Stolen Innocence. And Gary Tuckman, our CNN national correspondent who's been covering FLDS for years. Gary, let's remind the audience about the criminality of the FLDS and whether we're really making any progress to erode what goes on there.
Well, I think keep in mind Warren Jeffs, who's the head of all this, who members of the FLDS regard as their prophet, the direct mouthpiece of God, is in prison for life now after being convicted of raping 2 underage girls that he was married to. In this case, Wendell Nielsen was one of his top aides. He's thought to have been married to 34 different women. What he's been convicted of is illegal marriages with 3 of them. His defense was, and this is the defense FLDS members always use, is that they were celestial marriages. They weren't marriages recognized by the state. They were marriages recognized by their religion, but the jury in Texas felt otherwise, and he could go to prison for up to 10 years. So what's really significant, Dr. Drew, is during that raid in Texas where all the children were taken away and they were all brought back to their parents, 12 men were arrested. 11 of those men have now been convicted of charges.
Flora, is it too soon to celebrate? And please also tell me about these celestial marriages. They sound so lovely.
Yeah, it's not too soon to celebrate. I think it's a fabulous win for the victims of polygamy that he was convicted on these charges. And the celestial marriage is you're not legally married. You're just married spiritually in the eyes of God rather than in the eyes of man.
And Flora, he continues, Warren Jeffs, to control things from jail, I understand. Gary, according to Time magazine, he prepared his flock for doomsday. He's ordered an amphitheater-like structure on the West Texas ranch to be built in preparation for doomsday. And I believe, if I understand right, in front of this massive amphitheater he's building is a statue of him holding a little girl's hand. He's still very much in charge, isn't he?
Well, his believers, I was just out in Arizona and Utah where most of the FLDS followers still live. There's quite a few who live on this ranch in Texas, but most of them live in Arizona and Utah. And they still truly believe he will get out of prison. And they're waiting for that day. And when he gets out of prison, that's what this construction of his amphitheater is for. This is where he will appear and make his triumphant return. But if the authorities have their way, he will never get out of prison.
Do we have pictures, Control? Do we have any pictures of this amphitheater? I've not seen this yet, but I'm dying to see what it is they're talking about. Is there any way you can show that to us? Because this, to me, look at that. He's building an amphitheater from jail. Oh, my goodness. Alyssa, I want to go to you. It's so hard for someone that's not been through this. Look at that. He's building an amphitheater. It's crazy. For anyone who's not been through something like what you've lived through to understand how people get caught in that world. Can we help people understand that?
Yes, definitely. For most of us that were caught in the world, it was a generational problem. We were born into it, generation after generation. And with each generation, it became more secluded and it became more controlled by the men in charge. And so it is much harder for people to get an outside perspective and for the outside world to know what's going on within these communities. So it is very hard for someone to get out of them, whether these convictions are happening or not, because it's been bred into them from generation to generation, and it's really hard to break away from the chains of brainwashing and the continuous rhetoric that we received as children and as adults.
Flora, I know we've talked a lot over the last year or so about this. I know you have feelings about how they indoctrinate kids. Tell me about it.
Well, they start the indoctrination from birth. As a child, I witnessed many of the children be waterboarded to take away their voice, and it essentially silenced the child. And their schooling consists of listening to Warren Jeffs talk on cassette tapes and then doing reports on what they retained out of those cassettes. So it's a very rigorous indoctrination that they use with the children.
And Alyssa, how did you finally get out?
For me, like many, many others, we fled in the middle of the night. I had been married at such a young age, and it had been a forced marriage to my first cousin. And it took me 3 years of enduring continuous sexual abuse, physical abuse, and horrendous mental abuse for me to get to that point where I could question all of the indoctrination and to question my entire life, everything that I knew. And people have to understand that people that are within these cults and these closed communities, they don't understand the outside world. They're being told that the outside world is evil, that it's going to rape and pillage them, and so it's very scary for someone to leave. So we left in the middle of the night because that was the only way for us to get out.
But Alyssa, given that you were brainwashed like this, how did you finally gain a glimmer of insight that you wanted to get out?
It was kind of a life or death situation for me. I couldn't continue to live in the marriage and the abuse that I was living in. I had grown up watching my mother sacrifice her own children to the will of the priesthood or the will of the church, and to give up myself even for a child bride at the tender age of 14. And I had gone to Warren so many times after being married, explaining to him the horrors that were going on within this marriage, and always being sent back into it and being told to give myself mind, body, and soul. It took all of that, and I think really what it was is that instinct in all of us, that human spirit to survive, kicked in and realized that I couldn't continue anymore. And ultimately, Warren gave me an ultimatum. He said that the only way I would be saved was blood atonement, and so I just chose to leave, and best decision I ever made.
Did you say blood atonement?
Yes.
What does that mean?
Because Warren felt that I had sinned so severely within this community. I had chosen to protect myself from the man who they had given to me as a husband, and he felt that I had sinned so severely that I had no salvation unless I would choose to give up my own life. That was the only way that I would ever be allowed into heaven, was to give up my own life.
He's telling you to commit suicide? Is that what he's telling you?
Basically, yes.
Oh, and then I understand you had a little theory about maybe it was Flora had this theory about what that amphitheater is really all about.
Yeah. We're hearing that the amphitheater, we've just gotten word from somebody that just left the FLDS that the amphitheater is for, what it's actually for is when Warren has told the people that he's going to be broken out of prison. And when that happens, that all the world leaders from every nation will come to bow down to him and to learn how to rule in God's manner. And that's that's what that is being built for.
Gary, it concerns me that we could have another Jonestown kind of situation here. I just, that could happen. I mean, if this guy gets out. But what do we do to keep hammering away at this? What needs to be done?
Well, I think you bring up a good point. It's not hyperbole. The authorities who deal with the FLDS truly, honestly believe that if Warren Jeffs told people to commit violence, that a good portion of his followers would absolutely commit violence in his name. And this is a desperate man who is in prison for the rest of his life. So there is reason to be concerned. There's precedent, obviously, with Jonestown and other things, so there's a lot of reason to be concerned. What can be done? Keep chipping away. As I said, 12 people arrested after this raid. 11 have now been convicted. 11 have served prison time or are still in prison. And that's all you can keep on doing. But I will tell you that Flora and Alyssa and so many other women, not a majority of them, a small minority of women who've gotten out of the FLDS, are my heroes. They are absolutely so courageous.
They are.
For a woman